This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence, dispensing or receiving of reward or punishment. Hespisch in the hereafter. Webster's 9th New Collegiate Dictionary, 1986. Merriam-Webster and Key, Springfield, Massachusetts, USA. Beware. There are beings of this universe that will do you harm. The Onulum possess the flesh of the dead, bringing back a distorted form of the life that once lived within. Their motives are evil, and they will bring death and destruction to you and your peoples. Be wary of those whose recovery seems miraculous, for only my interventions are a miracle. You will know when it is my miracle. For all others, it is an Onyalum, Mishthrap's dream. Gospels of Thosolan, modern edition, 14th translation, Beyond Death. Tyler Jensen woke slowly to the sound of traffic, drifting through an open window. His body was sore from the hardwood floor he'd slept on, and his thoughts swam thick from the night's party. As was common these days, he wasn't certain where they were. Memories of the night's activities ran through his mind in incoherent flashes of people, music, and consumption. The room was large, with vaulted ceilings and sparse furnishings. Cluttered remnants of the party lay scattered throughout the room as bodies slept off various effects. His girlfriend, Linda, was quietly curled in a blanket on the corner of a large rug against the back wall. He didn't recognize the place, but assumed they were in a loft converted from an old warehouse or manufacturing facility. From the sounds coming in through the open windows, he figured they were somewhere in an industrial park. He leaned stiffly against the wall, lighting a cigarette to start his day. He was accustomed to waking like this and wasn't even sure what day it was. His head throbbed with the dull memories of consumption, and spotting a partially filled beer bottle, he drank the dregs, hoping to ease the incessant pounding. The beer was warm and flat, but it contained the precious alcohol that would ease his pain. Hair of the dog, he thought absently. Across from Tyler, a large archway led into another room where industrious sounds mixed with the occasional clink of bottles. Somebody was cleaning up. One of the hosts? Who cared? Tyler never offered to help. Who? Admiral's ghost. Snuffing his cigarette out in the empty beer bottle, he nudged Linda. She groaned hollowly before pulling the blanket tighter around her. Despite the hard night, she was still beautiful. Only her mussed-up hair betrayed the debauchery that was a regular part of their lives. Tyler didn't understand why she'd stayed with him. She deserved better, and he was the first to admit it. Linda Ashton came from an affluent family in Bel Air. Tyler had met her 6 years earlier at a beach party thrown by one of her fellow UCLA students. He'd been one of the suppliers invited to the outing, but after meeting Linda, he'd spent all his time entertaining her. Tyler, on the other hand, had come from a dysfunctional lower-middle-class family in the valley. After his parents split up, he drifted through the rest of euphoric state school before moving out after graduation. During those final years at home, he'd become a distant member of the family he no longer felt part of. For several years afterward, Tyler had drifted in and out of low-end jobs while attending the local community college. He was declared for an associate's degree in business, but his heart never fully embraced academics. As the years went by, he lost what limited direction he'd had and replaced his goals with substance use. It was during a brief stint as an assistant manager of a movie theater that he'd met Raul Sanchez at a co-worker's party. Like Linda, Tyler and Raul quickly became friends, and within a few short months, Tyler quit his job to sell substances for Raul full-time. Tyler still attended the community college for a while, since it proved lucrative for his new business venture. It was a great life. He earned 5 times what he'd made before, and all his recreational items were provided. It didn't take long before he became well acquainted with the elite of Los Angeles. Fortunately, Raul wasn't connected with the typical gangs controlling much of the substances market. Instead, his clientele leaned heavily toward upper-middle-class and wealthy youth. It was a safe market, and Tyler quickly established himself as a top distributor. He'd met Linda when she was a junior at UCLA. Like so many at that school, she was studying to become an actor. Although she drank and occasionally smoked herbal substance before meeting him, she'd never experienced the wide range of narcotics Tyler provided. It took little time before he opened her eyes to a larger world of possibilities, and after 6 years together, their lives were a beyond death 3 whirlwind of parties. His exotic lifestyle lured her from the life she'd known, and it wasn't long before she dropped out of school and moved in with him. A short time after, she became alienated from her family and turned away from the haughty world of Bel Air. Tyler felt guilty about corrupting her, but after his own downfall, he'd discovered his judgment was jaded. He felt important in the in crowd, and if anything got you down, you had a pharmacopoeia of substances to lift the spirits or ease your pain. Linda readily traded her previous life for the non-stop merry-go-round. She worked at a second-hand store specializing in classic clothing from the 60s and 70s. Although she didn't need the work, she loved the styles and socialization it provided. Tyler didn't mind. It brought a great deal of business his way through connections in her shop. As Tyler lit another cigarette, he wondered what future they would have together. She often spoke of marriage and children, but she never pressed him with those ideas. Tyler knew she barely concealed her desire to start a new life, a more normal life. He wasn't certain he could provide it, so he conveniently avoided the issue. Although he realized she wouldn't continue their lifestyle forever, he feared losing her more than life. It was a constant frustration that drove him further down the path of self-destruction. He thought he wanted change, but he wasn't certain how to achieve it. The thought of a regular job frightened him nearly as much as losing Linda. The power and prestige of his position could never be replaced with a typical desk job. He felt trapped. Every day, his lifestyle inflicted increasing damage on his body and mind, and even Raul suggested he take a break and dry out. Tyler knew it was sound advice after watching so many of his best customers destroy their lives for the next euphoric state. Would that be his fate? Many even collapsed, something he'd recently begun to fear. He hit the cigarette, exhaling a cloud into the vaulted ceiling. No substances could ease his troubled thoughts, and he realized he and Linda needed to find rest and solitude to rediscover themselves and their relationship. How often did they wake up in crowded rooms? They were rarely intimate these days, and this began to weigh heavily on their relationship. For Admiral's ghost, Raul had offered Tyler the use of his villa on the Pacific coast of Mexico. But Tyler never took advantage of this generosity. Perhaps now was the time to accept his offer and get away from the life that was take down them. Maybe getting out of town would help clear the mind and provide them the opportunity to discuss the direction their relationship was headed. Tyler knew it was a hard road that lay ahead, but losing her would be far worse. He put out his second cigarette and made up his mind to talk with Raul that afternoon. He was almost 30, and time was catching up. He'd put off a vacation for too many years, but assumed it was better late than never. He warmed to the idea of relaxing in a Mexican villa far from Los Angeles. He nudged Linda again, and this time her eyes blinked briefly. He was amazed that the simple act of touching her could produce such warm feelings. It was this warmth that convinced him he was making the right decision. He knew she'd be excited. She'd always urged him to take time off and travel. Tyler and Linda left the loft by taxi, arriving at their apartment an hour later. After a quick shower, a stiff drink, and a couple of doses, Tyler felt well enough to get on with his day. He left Linda sleeping on the couch as he went out to locate his car. As a rule, he never partied and drove. He wasn't inherently conscientious, but cautious. Driving while intoxicated was an easy ticket to jail, and so far, Tyler had avoided that mental journey. Many of his clients and friends were happy to take him out, as long as he provided supplies. Rides were never difficult to find. Once on the town, it was easy to move from one party to the next, as his unique position ensured him a wealth of friends. There were a few times when Tyler had problems locating his car the next day. At one point, it had actually been stolen, and although the police quickly found it, the car had been stripped of all the niceties. He'd lost nothing that couldn't be replaced, and was simply happy to have it back. Insurance restored it to its former glory. When the cab pulled up in front of his client's house, Tyler was relieved to see the car parked in the driveway. He'd owned it for 4 years, after Raul gave it to him, in appreciation for his hard work. It was a beautiful black BMW 325C convertible with tan beyond death 5 leather and only 50,000 miles. He loved it nearly as much as Linda. The irony was Raul purchased it at a police auction after it was seized from a rival substances dealer. Tyler cruised top down toward Raul's, and the air felt good despite the smog. He stopped at several clients, unloading the last of his supplies, so now was a perfect time to see Raul and ask about the villa. He wasn't the only salesman Raul employed, but he was the best. His Caucasian background and rugged good look opened doors that Raul's other employees didn't have access to. He grinned about his one advantage as he pulled into the underground parking beneath Raul's condominium. Raul lived in a 12th floor penthouse complete with a rooftop pool. It overlooked a private beach and was a nice private place for Raul to conduct business. Tyler thought it too ostentatious for his own style and preferred his smaller hillside home overlooking the skyline. He rang the doorbell and waited patiently. Raul's security personnel, many said enforcer, answered the door with his usual dour look. Without a word, he ushered Tyler in and pointed towards the open patio door. Tyler walked out and found Raul sitting at a large table, staring at an open laptop. "Welcome, my friend. Good to see you." Raul closed his laptop and gestured toward one of the open chairs. "Please, sit down and join me." "Refreshments?" Tyler took a seat, accepting the offer. "Sure. Whiskey on the rocks with a splash of water." Raul signaled one of his house staff and called out the order in Spanish. The person disappeared to retrieve the drinks. Raul pushed the laptop to the side and leaned back in his seat. "So tell me, how is that wonderful woman of yours? I hope you are taking good care of her. She is far too good for one such as you." He joked lightly. "She's fine. A slight hangover from last night," Tyler admitted. "Unfortunately, I think she is tiring of our lifestyle." Raul shook his head. "It is a hard life you live, my friend. Perhaps you need a break. Funny you should mention that." Tyler took advantage of the opening. "I was just thinking about taking you up on your offer of the villa. A few weeks in Mexico might dry us out. You know, to spend some time together, without the crowds." 6. Admiral's Ghost. Raul remained quiet before smiling broadly. "Of course, my friend," he exclaimed. "Don't just take a few weeks. Take a few months. Get away and enjoy yourselves. The villa is yours for as long as you want. I'll call down today and arrange it." Their drinks arrived, and Tyler happily reached for the calming effects of the whiskey. He thanked the young lady as she retreated back into the house, closing the door behind her. Raoul's staff knew when he was conducting business. Raoul moved closer to the table and leaned towards Samars Tyler. "Before you go, my friend, I need you to take care of a little business." Tyler shrugged. "No problem. What do you need? I'm out of stock, so I need new orders anyway." "Good, but that can wait. This is something bigger." Raoul sat back with a serious expression. Tyler could sense he was studying him, evaluating his reaction, and it made Tyler nervous. What had he just agreed to? "What is it?" he asked casually, sipping his drink to hide the growing nervousness. Raoul nodded slowly before he began telling Tyler about a new shipment of product he wanted Tyler to coordinate. Raoul's boss had found a new supplier that was dissatisfied with their current distribution methods. The supplier demanded new procedures and wanted their best man to be in charge of the transfer. Raoul picked Tyler because he trusted him more than most in his organization. Although he apologized for putting Tyler in the predicament, he assured him a generous reward would await him at the completion of the transaction. After that, he and Linda could head to Mexico for several months of deserved rest. This was the one aspect of this business Tyler hated. He was rarely involved in the bulk supply chain deliveries where gunfights erupted and federal agents' busts occurred. He'd been ignorant of it for years and preferred to keep it that way. Working with end users was far easier and nearly risk-free. Large quantities represented huge risks, and if you were caught, even larger sentences. He'd worked for Raoul for a long time, so despite his fears, he readily agreed to take charge. He kept his mind on Mexico, and the several months he and Linda would spend basking in the warm Pacific sunshine. This lifted his spirits, despite the growing concerns beyond death. Kitten. Adani didn't know how far he'd come, or whether it was far enough. His unusual vision showed a three-dimensional map of galaxies in the region, and he transitioned into one of them at random. As he came out of the transition, he was surrounded by stars and nebulae swirling to the silent music of gravity. He needed somewhere remote, somewhere that wasn't guarded. But where? He feared retribution this time. He didn't know how, but he'd manipulated matter in a way that went against everything he knew about universal law. It wasn't supposed to be possible, but somehow he'd done it. If only I knew how. After the disaster, he'd fled as the Creator unleashed an unholy wrath on all that remained. Adani could only imagine the anger his mistake caused. How did I do it? He still had no answers, but was certain the universe would hunt him down. They would all hunt him down, so he kept moving. Adani was the name of the first being he'd inhabited. Life as Adani had been great, so he'd kept the name in memory of that experience. After so many millennia, he only thought of himself as Adani. He was an Onyalam, an ethereal being. They were not made of matter or energy, but existed between the material universe and the dimensions outside it. They were free spirits, traveling the universe in search of adventure. The universe had created them without purpose and let them thrive despite their reckless nature. Though they lacked design, their impact on the universe was profound. How did I do it? He couldn't figure it out. Because of their makeup, Onyalam weren't able to affect the real substance of the universe, matter and energy. Likewise, matter and energy could not affect them. Until recently, this balance had been maintained. Despite those rules, Adani had unknowingly affected matter and energy. In a brief moment of anger and frustration, he'd destroyed an entire galaxy. The scope of his mistake was undeniable. Creators would fear him, and the universe would have no choice but to undo his existence. He was no longer an insignificant threat to their creations, so he fled in fear. Focus. There must be somewhere to hide. He stared at the galactic core turning below him, its spiral arms spinning slowly about its center. The stars and nebulas fought against the inevitable. 8 Admiral's ghost pull inward. His special vision focused on the periphery, where several planetary systems were capable of supporting life. Perfect. He'd find a dying life form, take over its body, and lie low for a few millennia. Perhaps that would be enough to escape his fate. He'd no idea whether these worlds were guarded, but if they were, he knew ways to get past. A blind transition, bypassing the space between, and he could land inside undetected. It was risky, but the only way to avoid detection. He focused on a planet most likely to harbor life, and made his leap. Tyler walked casually along a neighborhood sidewalk toward his car. He was relieved to have completed the delivery and looked forward to the mental journey to Mexico. Like Tyler, the new supplier's man had been nervous, but had maintained a cool exterior. They'd both shown great relief when it was over. Large transactions were notoriously dangerous, and in their line of work, you never knew if the federal agents had infiltrated one of the parties to set up a sting. Reduced prison time was a strong motivator to break even unbreakable relationships. The unknown was what people feared most. As if the federal agents weren't bad enough, these large transactions also drew interest from rivals. They employed various methods to gain information about large movements, and if they thought it possible, they would use that information to hijack shipments or raid deliveries. Those types of exploits typically involved violence and death. At least Raoul had sent several men experienced in those types of situations. Although the men made Tyler nervous, he knew Raoul trusted them with his life. At least one of the men was related to Raoul, although Tyler didn't know how. Substances were a dangerous business, and you couldn't even trust your own staff. Power plays and hostile takeovers were common, and disgruntled members of your organization could easily wreak havoc if a rival bought them off. Fortunately, no one in Raoul's organization had turned since Tyler joined. Still, you couldn't rule out the possibility. It didn't matter now. Tyler had completed the transaction and would soon make his way south. He'd had one of Raoul's strong men drop him off blocks from his car. Forever cautious, Tyler beyond death. 9 insisted on safety first. His knowledge of the product's location was as valuable a commodity as the substances themselves. He had no illusions people would take down for that information. He turned off the sidewalk and through a back alley. The neighborhood was reasonably safe at night, but he performed several jigs and backtracks to eliminate the possibility of being followed. As he came onto another sidewalk, he stared across the street at a small park. It was empty, but Tyler remained cautious nonetheless. He spotted his car on the other side of the park where he'd left it. He made sure the streets were clear before making his way through the dry grass, walking casually, trying to eliminate suspicion from neighbors. More than once, neighborhood households had called the police because he'd parked on their street. It never mattered. He always made sure his car was empty when he left it unattended. He walked beneath the lone acacia tree, dominating the center of the park, and moved up the small hill to his car. The shade of the tree provided moderate cover from prying eyes, and as he neared his car, he began to relax. He never let his guard down, but so far, everything had worked as planned. He crested the top of the small hill when a flash of bright light enveloped him. Blinded, Tyler was paralyzed by a searing pain tearing through his body. As quickly as it came, the light faded, and with it, Tyler's consciousness. Darkness enclosed him as a single word drifted through his mind. Damn. Tyler hung motionless above the paramedics as they pulled a limp body from the ambulance. Like in a dream, the paramedics silently pushed the gurney through doors into the hospital emergency room. Tyler had never been to an emergency room, but it looked similar to those he'd seen on television. He stared curiously at the lifeless body on the gurney. Was that his body? He looked closely and saw his own face beneath the oxygen mask. It was a strange and disorienting feeling. He was a balloon attached to his body. He saw what was happening, but was disconnected from all his other senses. Everything was silent as paramedics wheeled him into a room with blue-clad people scrambling wildly. From Tyler's 10 Admiral's Ghost perspective, the uniformed people moved in random patterns, but apparently they had purpose. To save me, he thought. What an odd thought. His body was inert as they stripped him and prodded him while attaching equipment. They yelled to each other across his dying body, and he could see their mouths move, but everything remained silent. Like some twisted dream sequence in a movie, he watched the horrifying story of his survival unfold. It was disturbing, yet compelling. He silently cheered the doctors, urging them to restore his life. Am I dying, or already dead? The question drifted through his awareness, as disconnected as he felt. He struggled to remember what had happened, but his thoughts were random fragments like someone else's memories. He remembered a job or transaction, but couldn't recall details. Perhaps that was it. The transaction had gone badly, and he'd been taken down in armed confrontations. Somehow that didn't seem right, especially when you noted the lack of blood. Substances. That was more likely. His lifestyle had finally destroyed him. Was it a heart attack, liver failure, or a stroke? They were all possibilities. He felt a pang of regret about not knowing what had taken down him. A fresh flurry of activity drew his attention to the scene below. They worked feverishly on his body, and finally brought out electric paddles used to resuscitate heart attack victims. This is it, he thought mildly. The end. He watched helpless as charges surged through his body over and over again. But it wasn't working. The doctor rubbed the paddles one last time and stepped towards the body. He applied the shock. But this time, something happened. An arc of electricity shot from Tyler's body, knocking the doctor to the floor. A flurry of arcs flew through the room, shocking people and equipment. Tyler was fascinated as he watched his body arch and convulse in the electrifying fury surrounding him. Everyone froze in horror, gripped by fear, until the arcing stopped. This was obviously something new. Tyler's body writhed as it shifted and separated into myriad pieces before coalescing once again. It was a powerful sight, and everyone remained motionless. Again and again, his body disintegrated before pulling back together. Each time, the pieces moved further apart, failing to reintegrate as they moved further beyond death. Even from the bed, Tyler couldn't understand what he was seeing. Nothing like this had been on television. With a final burst of energy ripping across the room, the last remnants of Tyler's body vanished into the air. At that same moment, he felt something pull his awareness. Fear seized him as he was yanked from the hospital. He watched in horror as the hospital, the city, and finally the planet dwindled to mere dots in his awareness. His speed accelerated as he shot through the darkness of space, far from Earth and the life he'd known. Stars and planets rushed past at speeds he couldn't imagine. The effect was surreal, like fields passing by a car window. The blurred passage was silent. Finally, the stars receded into a swirling clump. To Tyler, it looked like a picture of a galaxy he'd seen on the Science Channel. It turned slowly below him as he came to an abrupt stop. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a deep voice. Tyler caught only bits and pieces, but didn't recognize the words. Confusion and fear gripped him like a vice. He knew he was dead, but where were the pearly gates or pits of fire? This wasn't what he imagined death would be, although he had to admit he'd almost never thought about such things. And how had he died? Could a body simply disintegrate into nothingness? Surely that was not normal. What had happened? Where was he? The voice kept speaking, and Tyler tried to listen to what it said. If only it would stop fading in and out. Did he just hear, "Okem macduytuong"? What does that mean? The voice grew louder, and he desperately focused to understand anything. More radnij ke kulum aun solfrededem manifre. He knew something was wrong. It wasn't making sense. What was it saying? Panic threatened to overwhelm him as he struggled to understand his predicament. Was this hell? Maybe it was Satan talking. He'd never believed in religion, but now seriously considered it. He caught a word. Did he hear, "You cannot"? He tried to calm down and focus. Whatever it was, it repeated itself. Solfra dedem, forbidden worlds. You cannot vergi inuai, or okem, may any life walk sunyeta. Morwal timinjukan being that sid lodem et blasmus. 12. Admiral's Ghost. He listened patiently as it spoke over and over, and after each repetition, he could make out new words. Finally, everything fell into place and he understood the booming voice. I am Ke Kulum, and these are forbidden worlds. You may not enter them or interact with any life therein. I will remove any being that does not heed these warnings. The voice continued its chant, but Tyler didn't understand what it meant. The translation was more confusing than before he could understand it. At least he didn't think it was Satan. If he understood it correctly, the speaker was Ke Kulum. Tyler had never heard that name, either for Satan or God. Maybe this was a god from a different religion few knew about. Maybe no one on Earth knew about it. Wouldn't that would take the cake, he thought. He remembered television evangelists and wondered where their God was. Unfortunately, these thoughts didn't bring comfort. He felt a growing sensation, like he was floating on water. It was like being an oil slick spread over great distances. He followed the feeling and sensed individual pieces drifting aimlessly, yet a part of him. Mentally pulling on each piece, he tried to pull them together, but nothing happened. He focused harder, but still nothing. The distraction was welcomed despite its futility. He tried one last time. Did I feel movement? He wasn't certain, but it was like something had moved. He pulled once more, and again felt movement. His spirits lifted with the newfound success. It became a quest to regain the pieces of his being, to regain what he thought of as Tyler. Finally, his efforts paid off as the pieces coalesced into a single entity. The sheer number of parts was daunting. He willed them to integrate into a whole, and they shifted and moved toward some center that he hoped was him. He coaxed them further, and as if released from some grip, they rushed together. Unfortunately, the successful movement was paired with a burning pain ripping through his awareness. The galaxy blurred into colorful lights as the pain was replaced with darkness. Beyond Death 13, Tyler's mind began to focus, as if waking from a deep sleep. That's it, he thought numbly. It was all a nightmare. I'll wake up next to Linda and everything will be fine. Except he couldn't wake up. Although he felt conscious, everything remained total darkness. He could detect nothing, like he was adrift in a dark void, and only his mind remained. "I truly am dead," he thought, as he realized it was not a dream. "I am dead, and this is the nothingness I must endure for eternity." Though his despair deepened, he took stock of the situation and felt somewhat like a whole being. He felt minute pieces that were integrated into a single entity, but it was something different than the Tyler before. It was strange and frightening, and he explored the wholeness, feeling the parts moving as one. He couldn't see the movement, but he felt it nonetheless. It gave him something to cling to, and he held on hard. If he felt anything, then he must exist. The question was where. He focused his awareness on the sensations and began to experiment with control. After a while, he could release tiny pieces of his essence, spreading them outward before reeling them back. It was a tiny victory, but it occupied his time. It kept despair at bay and alleviated the terror that threatened to overwhelm him. In the distance, he sensed a flickering light. It flashed and pulsated wildly, as though fighting an unseen force. As it intensified, it grew larger. But as quickly as it started, the flashing stopped. Tyler stared down a long tunnel towards a steady glow. Something pulled at his awareness, and he moved towards the illumination. His awareness gained speed, as though seeking the light before it vanished. This was it. He was crossing into the afterlife. With a rush, he burst through the opening into a bright, white room. It was a sea of unbroken whiteness, giving it the appearance of white space. Surely this was heaven. He felt whole and directed his awareness to see what parts of Tyler remained. He searched through the brightness and saw a shimmering gray cloud of his new existence. It moved with a million particles, never taking shape, but clumping together. It was small comfort, and confirmed what Tyler already knew. He was dead. Was this his soul? His essence or spirit? He turned from his shimmering soul and directed his awareness to the 14. Admiral's ghost featureless surroundings. The whiteness spread out into the infinity. Although he sensed movement through his awareness, he wasn't certain he was actually turning. Without a frame of reference, what was up and what was down, it was still better than the darkness. Maybe this was heaven. Somehow he doubted that. Considering the life he'd led, he was quite certain the pearly gates weren't opening for him. He'd never believed in God. But still, it never hurt to hold on to hope. Who knew what the universe held? In the distance, Tyler heard a soothing voice. He couldn't make out the words, but they seemed familiar. Like before, he had difficulty understanding the language. It sounded foreign, but as it continued, Tyler caught small fragments. At least it didn't repeat like the previous time. A different voice broke in, similar to the first, yet unique. Words surfaced through the unintelligible speech as the two voices spoke with each other. At least Tyler didn't think they were talking to him. How would he know? A third voice suddenly joined the conversation. This one was less soothing and more fervent. It spoke rapidly, often interrupting the other two. This voice was distressed, or was it anger? Tyler wasn't certain. More words filtered through, building slowly as before. Tyler was quite certain neither was Kikulum. As if a veil was lifted, Tyler suddenly understood everything being said. The angry voice, he had decided it was anger, dominated the discussion. "I do not see the reason for this decision. Clearly, he is a serious threat to all creation." The voice was very persuasive, and didn't pause long enough for the others to address the concerns. "We believed it was not possible, and yet it has happened. It could easily happen again. Is this what you want? What we intend or what happens are not yours to question." One of the soothing voices began. We see everything as opportunities, and this situation is no different, no matter how unusual. The other voice picked up. We do not agree with your assessment, and believe the threat you fear is invalid. The other voice began again. It has begun a new journey, a journey as something new and wonderful. We wish to see if it thrives, or if it does not. Beyond death, 15, the other soothing voice finished. It will be watched, and your creations protected. Although we won't interfere in its development, we will make sure it won't interfere in yours. The other soothing voice started once more. We believe your fears are unfounded, and look forward to the new creations you will make. Do not fear. This being shall not threaten your domain. We are infinite, and its place in us shall be but a tiny mote amongst your stars. Tyler heard finality in the words. There was a long pause of silence, as if the conversation had ended. At last, the angry voice spoke, this time more calm. I am devastated by the loss and angered at the senseless destruction, but I will console myself with the task of rebuilding, recreating that which was taken. The voice paused once more in thought. Thank you for your words. I am humbled by your wisdom, and I leave you reluctantly. The angry voice faded, and Tyler heard one of the soothing voices speak. What say you, Adani? Or is it Tyler? The other voice piped in. Perhaps it is neither. You must find a new name, something to commemorate this momentous event. Tyler didn't know how to respond. He didn't understand anything he'd heard. Were they talking about him? Who was Adani? They definitely said Tyler. He gathered himself. I do not understand. Where am I? Better yet, where are you? He was fearful about questioning them, especially if they were the voice of God or gods. Did he have a right to question them? In answer to his question, two shapes formed in front of his awareness. They were basically round, yet shifted irregularly. Various colors flowed through them, especially when they spoke. We are here, same as you. Small comfort, Tyler thought. The other voice spoke. We will not harm you if that is your fear. Are you Tyler then? I believe you must be, since you do not know us. Tyler wrangled with their words. Yes, I am Tyler, he answered truthfully. Who is Adani? Again, he was nervous about being so bold. One of the voices responded, Adani is you. Okay, that didn't help. Tyler didn't understand the answer and remained quiet. 16 Admiral's Ghost. You are something new, the voice said as if sensing his confusion. You are something unexpected. We look forward to your journeys with great anticipation. The other voice took over. We will let you discover yourself, answer your own questions, and find your place within us. Do not despair. You are not dead. The voice was warm and soothing. You are beginning a new stage of your existence, a stage of discovery and exploration. We will watch you grow into something new and distinct. The other voice intruded. Indeed, you will become something wonderful. Tyler didn't feel wonderful but held his tongue. They were far more optimistic than he felt. He wanted to ask more questions, but the white space around him disappeared, leaving him drifting in outer space. He blankly watched galaxies spin slowly around him, and swarms of questions filled his mind. Who were those beings? What had he become? What or who was Adani? He suddenly wished he were dead. Whatever he'd become was far worse than any hell he could have imagined. Where do I go? What do I do? The questions hung in his awareness, filling him with the realization he was utterly lost. Never before had he been so alone. He needed a drink, a needle. In the universe after his strange encounter with the mysterious voices, Tyler shrank inward, looking back at a life he would never see again. He was the first to admit he'd never been a good person. Selfish was the right word, thinking only of himself and the next euphoric state. Was this his punishment? Not hell, but purgatory. He wasn't sure, but realized Linda and his former world were gone, probably forever. These dark thoughts sank him further into the self-absorbed depths of depression. Selfish to the end, he thought miserably. He wanted to escape, to get euphoric state and forget what was happening. But he had none of the products that dulled the pain. No cigarettes, no alcohol, no substances. The last time he could remember such an existence was as a kid, although his dependencies started easily enough in euphoric state school. It wasn't until later they'd become a crutch to evade his inadequacies. They'd prevented him from seeing the inner Tyler. But now, all that remained was the inner Tyler locked in an insubstantial cloud, a loser wandering the universe forever. How would Linda handle his disappearance? How long had he been gone? What did time mean for something like him? Maybe time no longer mattered. Maybe Linda no longer existed. The thought chilled him. Looking back over his short life, he wished he could make things different. Make them right. He'd harmed Linda by bringing her into his world. It was a world of false happiness and short-sighted dreams. A world without children, a home, or a family. 17 to 18 Admiral's ghost. He'd always fooled himself into believing those things were only dreams as well. But now he'd never have the opportunity to find out. His one chance to make a change was cut short, and he knew he'd probably never see Linda again. Her face was fading from memory as he clung desperately, not wanting to lose her in the vastness of his new existence. But he was changing, and other thoughts intruded, blocking his memories that were all that remained of his existence. Depression grew as new, strange visions popped into his awareness. People, places, and things swam past his inner eye, in a procession that confused and disoriented. They pushed on his mind, trying to replace the memories he thought were his and his alone. Fear accompanied these strange, alien intrusions. Something was trying to replace him, to erase Tyler and replace him with something foreign and disturbing. He fought the threat, willing himself to remember who he was and where he'd come from. He clung to his fleeting memories of happy times, times when he and Linda were intimate and close. He thought about their first meeting, their first time making love, and their first time sharing a euphoric state together. He remembered her initial trepidations, but how she'd finally trusted him. They had a wonderful time at an amusement park, euphoric state, happy, and without a care in the world. He'd known right then that he wanted to stay with her forever. And with that admission came the usual fear that she wouldn't reciprocate. And after 5 years, he still feared she would leave, realizing her mistake, returning to the normal life he could not provide. He knew she desired it. Was he going to punish himself forever? Punish himself for letting her down, denying her what she deserved? Wasn't his loss really her gain? Now she could move on with her life, reunite with her family, and find someone stable to settle down with. He had no illusions her family wouldn't mourn his disappearance. He hoped Linda might. The grief was so real and palpable. I love you, Linda. I will always love you. This lone thought calmed his spirit, and the alien intrusion backed down. The strange visions were still there, lurking, waiting. He could sense them, searching for an opportunity to surface and gain control. Maybe this was what the voices had meant. Maybe this alien presence was something new and different. Maybe they wanted it, a needle in the universe, 19 to grow and change him. It was disturbing. I can't let that happen. I won't give myself up. He would fight hard to maintain possession of his awareness. A corner of his mind urged him to let go, to disappear into oblivion and free himself from the pain. No, I will not succumb. I will not run from this reality. The force of the thought struck Tyler hard. He'd always taken the easy path, avoiding conflicts, complexities, and pain. His habits were a sure sign of his unwillingness to meet challenges head-on. He'd used the substances to avoid and suppress, to self-medicate the illness he viewed as life. So where did this power of resolve come from? He didn't know, but it, too, was alien. Regardless, he held onto it as a shield against the other. Calm swept through his awareness, and he took notice of the place around him. He was fascinated by the spinning galaxies painted on the dark canvas of space. It was beautiful and breathtaking, like a collage or mobile strung out before him, moving slowly, yet rhythmically. How was he able to see so much? Surely the galaxies were extremely far apart and should appear as mere dots against the black background. How did he see them so close? They were like candy he could reach out and take in his hands. It puzzled him. He thought about the ethereal cloud he'd seen and reached out with his awareness to feel those myriad parts. He sensed them spread thin against the void and willed them together, urging them to coalesce into a whole. But try as he might, he saw nothing of his essence. He knew they existed, but they were not visible. How is it I see? It was an unusual thought, but made sense considering the insubstantial thing he'd become. What other abilities did he possess? He heard no sounds. Everything rotated to an invisible symphony. But wait, he'd heard the voices. Silence in space he could understand. But what if he was on a planet? Would he hear then? How can I get to a planet? It was confusing. He could move his awareness, spinning the vision around, but how could he move in a direction? It was a strange sensation, akin to what paralyzed people might feel. He'd never thought of moving as something you had to think about. When you wanted to move, you simply did. Little conscious thought went into the process, so why couldn't he move? He was instantly frustrated. Ignoring the frustration, he diverted his thoughts elsewhere, assuming for the moment he could move. Where would he go? 20 Admiral's ghost. What would he do? He wanted to go back to Earth and his life with Linda. But where was that? He was certain he wouldn't recognize his galaxy among the millions around him. Even if he could, where would he look? He didn't know where Earth was in the Milky Way. He knew there were billions, if not gazillions, of galaxies in the universe. So how did one search that? The daunting nature of his task sank him back into depression. Despair raised its ugly head, and with it, the alien presence stirred. "Stop it! Stop it!" he commanded. "I will not give up. I will stay calm." This force of will brought calm, forcing the alien to retreat. It would be back. It waited on the edges, looking for an opportunity to gain the upper hand. Think. Where can you go? Perhaps he could look for others like himself, assuming they existed. However, as quickly as the thought came, he discounted it. The voices indicated he was something new, so he was probably a lone being in the universe. But something must surely exist with which he could interact. Why make him alone? Where was the interest and beauty in that? In his mind, he screamed at the voices, "What do you want of me?" He didn't actually think they heard him, but the release felt good. Anger was powerful, and it reinforced the newfound strength within him, giving him a reason to continue. "I curse you for eternity. No one deserves this. No one." He stared blankly at a galaxy floating nearby, a part of his mind deciding it looked like a brain, convoluted on the outside and slightly oblong, as he watched it float by. the galaxy suddenly grew, rushing as if to swallow him. The effect startled him, and as quickly as it had started, the galaxy snapped back to its original size. Whoa! The incident scared him, but curiosity forced him to attempt to duplicate the effect. This time, he deliberately focused on the galaxy, watching it grow bigger, totally filling his awareness. When he looked away, it snapped back to its original size. Was this it? Was this how he could move? He picked another galaxy and focused on its center. As before, the galaxy grew large, filling his awareness. Then it snapped back when he took his attention away. The effect was disorienting, but at least it promised a chance to move. A newfound resolve grew within him, filling him with hope. He could find Earth and see Linda once more. The odds were against a needle in the universe 21 his success. But what else was he going to do? An impossible search seemed far better than floating aimlessly through space. It would be his quest, a quest to find home. He knew he would have to master this ability to move through the universe if he was to have even a remote chance of finding Earth. Causing a galaxy to grow larger in your awareness was one thing. Moving through it was another. He managed to work out how to see through the sea of galaxies. That was easy. You only had to focus gently on a distant galaxy, and then move your vision beyond it until another came into view. After a little practice, it became nearly second nature. Once he'd mastered this vision, he moved to the harder part, moving into the galaxy itself. He put all his concentration to the task, but every time he thought he had it, his awareness snapped back to his original starting position. He was missing something crucial, but couldn't figure out what. He wondered whether the alien presence knew how to move. It was risky to contemplate such a request, and he figured it wasn't worth the reward. Still, a part of his awareness begged him to communicate with the entity to speed up the process. He ignored the urgings and continued to experiment. There had to be something that would open the galaxies and move him to the next level. That was how he saw it, like layers to be penetrated as you moved inward. But how? Frustration threatened to stop his search, but once again his new resolve forced calm. I must concentrate and find the missing piece to the puzzle. He practiced focusing on a galaxy, then on something within the galaxy, moving inexorably down through the layers. His awareness pierced each easily, but as soon as he averted his attention, he was pulled out. He cursed himself for not being smart enough to find the missing clue. A part of his mind desired the chemical crutches that would make the process less frustrating. He laughed inwardly. Sure, I just need to be euphoric state. He took a moment to reflect while he stared at the endless sea of galaxies around him. He picked out a spiral one, and a small part of him thought it looked like it could be the Milky Way. But he dared not hope. He stared at the mass of stars shining brightly through the blackness, wishing he could be inside its arms. As if caught in a vortex, his awareness blurred as the galaxy he'd been watching exploded in a gray-white light, rushing toward 22. Admirals ghost him at incredible speeds. Fear threatened to overwhelm him as he held on to the ride. Where was he going, and how? As quickly as it began, it stopped. Once again, he was floating silently through space. But this time, instead of the billions of galaxies, he swam through a sea of stars and nebulae. In one direction, an intense brightness filled most of his vision. Everything moved slowly around this bright sphere, connecting everything with its invisible strings. Surprise caught him off guard as he struggled to control his emotions when he realized he'd moved inside the galaxy. Somehow he'd pierced a layer, but he couldn't figure out how. What had he done? Think, Tyler. What did you do? He had stared at the galaxy calmly. But what else? Nothing came to mind, and the ever-present frustration reared its head. He focused on the multitude of stars and glowing clouds of stellar dust, wondering if they would leap into his awareness as before. Just as before, he could focus in on an individual item as it filled his awareness. But like before, they would snap back when his concentration wavered. At least he came back inside the galaxy. He hadn't solved the puzzle, but he made progress. He studied the galactic debris and wondered if this were the Milky Way. If so, Earth lay somewhere inside the starry soup. He held back hopes, not wanting to get ahead of himself. First, he had to understand what brought him here, and how he could go farther. Better yet, how could he go back? Could he? He had an innate sense he could, but didn't know how. Perhaps it was a one-way ticket. But if that were true, his hopes of finding Earth were even more remote. Don't dwell on it. Get a grip and figure it out. The new resolve urged him onward, something he appreciated and despised. The old Tyler would have given up by now, but the new Tyler pressed on, forcing him to focus like he'd never done before. He resented it, but continued the search. Though his mind tired of the efforts, he didn't feel tired. Perhaps the new Tyler didn't need sleep. He decided he felt the same as when he'd met the voices. It was unusual, but not displeasing. The weariness he felt was boredom or frustration. He paused to watch the galactic dance swirl around him. He marveled at its immensity. Science was never one of Tyler's strongest subjects, and although he'd read about Earth's solar, a needle in the universe 23 system, he never paid much attention to it. Like everyone he knew, he'd occasionally thought about what was out there and whether they were alone. But a few alien movies later, he felt confident they were not. Still, he'd never actually known what existed. Was it just voices without bodies? The memory of his strange encounter was eerie. But living on Earth made such thoughts fleeting, an occasional diversion when you were too euphoric state to function. He could recall those times when he'd found himself drifting in dreamlike trances, wondering what the universe was and what his place was within it. Unfortunately, as time went by, these highs transformed, still dreamlike but fading quickly from memory. With those fading memories, the feelings of wonder retreated. Looking back, Tyler decided his entire life had been a dream, some euphoric state he'd experienced, now fading in the cold, hard sobriety that faced him. No. His resolve ripped through his awareness. It was happening again. He was losing himself. He felt the presence trying to insinuate itself into his mind. He grabbed hold of his resolve, fighting the presence. He had to stay alert to keep from sinking into his past memories. Focusing on the galaxy once more, he remembered what he'd been doing before breaking into the layer. He tried to reproduce it, picking out a glowing cloud of blue, red, and purple, staring at it casually. It moved past other stars, and he noticed that it, too, contained stars. What would those stars look like from within the cloud of light? He wanted to see one up close and was about to focus when a blur of light rushed past. When it stopped, he was inside the cloud, the red-blue glow surrounding him. He was awed by its breathtaking grandeur. The cloud shimmered and moved like ripples on a pond, and throughout its interior, clusters of stars shone brightly. It was a spectacular display of light, movement, and color. An abstract painting, yet three-dimensional. For the first time in his life, Tyler gained a true appreciation for the beauty of the universe. Hope seemed in reach if he could master movement and find home. He was uncertain what he'd done to transition inward, but he knew it was not because of his concentration. Instead, the change occurred when he was not focused, yet wanting to see more. Was it really that simple? Okay, you've done it twice. Surely you can do it again. The thought prepared him for another attempt. 24 Admiral's ghost. He picked out a cluster of stars and stared gently at them. He thought about how they looked. One small and intense, the others larger and less bright. He thought about the largest red star and wondered what it would look like up close. He didn't focus, but thought about being there. Like a door opening, he felt the transition and watched as a blur of light moved him down another layer. This time, the move was effortless and less intense. He hovered over the red star, its immense bulk filling his awareness. He was awestruck by its size, brilliance, and power. He stared quietly into its depths, amazed at the sprays of light shooting along its surface. They reached out toward him before falling back like waves crashing on a beach. It was mesmerizing, like staring into a fire. The moment brought pangs of loneliness as he recalled many nights around a beach bonfire. The star spun quietly on its axis, displaying a dramatic show that would have brought tears to his eyes, if he'd had any. He felt both alive and yet insignificant. The size and beauty of this one star made him feel like a mote in an ocean of giants. This one cloud held hundreds of such stars, and the thought of those giants humbled him. The math was mind-boggling, and his quest seemed further from his reach. A small planet suddenly spun past his awareness. It was so small in comparison to the red giant. It was only a black smudge against the bright background. He watched as it rounded the other side and disappeared. It was amazing something so small could even exist so close to the fiery mammoth. Although he felt no heat, the vision of the molten ball made him feel warm inside. He could only imagine the intense heat this close. He turned his attention away and looked at the dark spheres he'd seen in the distance. He focused on one, and it grew large enough to realize it was a planet circling the star. It, too, seemed large. It was dark green in color, while other colors flowed across its surface like a spinning marble. He thought about what it would be like inside the swirling colors and felt the rush of transition. Gaseous clouds flew past at dizzying speeds. Their colors were shades of green and white with black mixed throughout. To his awareness, it felt like he was inside a tornado, but he felt nothing. It was a silent display with no sound to measure the intense fury around him. He watched small vortices whipping past like signposts on a road. The planet was clearly inhospitable, and he felt certain no life could exist in that maelstrom, a needle in the universe 25. Although he felt nothing, his awareness could almost hear the rush of wind around him. If he'd been human, he would have been shredded like tissue. Eventually, the initial thrill faded, replaced with a feeling of vertigo. He wanted to move back out, but hadn't yet figured that part. Fear threatened as he imagined being stuck in the swirling clouds forever. He thought back to the red star, visualizing its magnetic rays of fire dancing on the surface, and at the same time, he thought about staring back at the planet from a distance. He felt relief as he transitioned once more. When it stopped, he was back above the red star, staring at the green planet. That was it. He'd done it. He'd moved down a layer and back out again. The success filled him with confidence. He was no longer trapped, but free to search for Earth, to find Linda, and return home. He visualized the gas cloud from a distance and transitioned back into the galactic pool. He was back at his original starting point, staring at the nebula he'd been inside. Excitement grew as he felt a strong desire to master this newfound ability. With growing confidence, he practiced, seeking out different objects, submerging into their layers, before backing out once more. He did it over and over again, each object a blur as he jumped from place to place and layer to layer, pausing long enough to pick his next target. After a while, he felt he'd mastered the ability, so he stopped in the middle of the galactic swirl, a kind of contentment sweeping through him. He looked back through his travels and remembered every object he'd seen. He could call it up from memory, and if he wanted, travel back to it in an instant. It was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Not even his greatest highs could match the thrill of traveling across such vast distances in the blink of an eye. Unfortunately, like all new things, the thrill would fade, but the memories would last forever. For now, he relished the moment, calm spreading through him after the intense rush. He gazed quietly at the movement of stars while the sensation ebbed. He could begin his journey and go where no man had gone before. He chuckled at the thought. On his Admiral's ghost, Tyler couldn't decide the best way to start looking for Earth. The task remained daunting despite his newfound abilities. He knew there were millions and millions of galaxies with millions and millions of planets and stars. So where did one start when looking for a solitary planet? It was humbling, and with no defined boundaries in any direction. Where could he start, and where could he end? How would he know if he backtracked? With his new memory, he thought he might at least recognize somewhere he'd already been. He randomly chose a direction and began surveying the galaxies along that path. He easily dismissed many of them since he was certain the Milky Way was a spiral galaxy with arms. He'd remembered as much from watching the Science Channel with Linda. Considering his usual state of euphoria on Earth, he wasn't certain whether he'd seen the Milky Way or some galaxy next door. However, it was something to hold on to, despite his lack of confidence. Spotting a promising galaxy, he noticed the arms radiated like a picture of the sun drawn on a black canvas. He felt certain that wasn't the Milky Way, so he skipped it and continued the hunt. The next galaxy looked promising, but it was smaller than the others around it. Despite this size difference, it was closer to his dim recollections than any of the others he'd seen so far. It would have to do. He focused on the outer rim of the galaxy and made the transition inside. Revolving around the inner core, he was dumbfounded by the sheer number of objects he would have to search. Undaunted, he chose a direction and transitioned to the inner levels and out again, darting in and out as quickly as he could. Most objects were quickly discounted if they were in nebulae, had stars that were the wrong color, or had too many stars too close together. Even with this less than perfect filtering, he knew he was taking far too long to cover so little a distance. With mounting frustration, he calmed himself with the realization that he was just starting, and that it would likely take time. Still, that insurmountable feeling crept back into his awareness. He completed his search and was ready to leave when he stumbled upon a solar system that appeared similar to Earth's. The sun was the same, though he was amazed at its size compared with the planets. He tried to remember how many planets Earth's a needle in the universe. 27 solar system possessed, but his rudimentary science background failed to produce an accurate count. He tried to remember them by name: Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Those came easily enough, and he thought he could even remember what they looked like. But the others were fuzzy, maybe Mercury or Venus, he wasn't sure. In any event, he wouldn't recognize them anyway. He turned his attention to the largest planets in the solar system. There were 3 gas giants, 2 of them with rings. He wasn't sure about Jupiter, but he remembered Saturn had rings, so perhaps one of them was Saturn. He most definitely couldn't remember their order. The other gas giant without rings might have been Jupiter, but he imagined it being brighter with more red. Damn, Why didn't I pay more attention in science? Although he knew why, it didn't ease his frustration. The planets matched close enough to his recollections that he began searching for an Earth-like planet. As if answering his prayers, he spotted a tiny planet closer to the sun than the gas giants. It was small, blue, and contained wisps of white clouds. Excitement grew, though he quickly suppressed it until he could validate it properly. Better to keep it in check in case it turned out to be an alien world. He pictured the planet in his awareness and wished himself above it. The transition was quick and smooth, placing him at a spot above the planet's equator. He surveyed the space around him, noting nothing flashed by in orbit. He believed he should see at least one satellite or some space debris. But the space was vacant. The planet spun quietly below, large cloud banks skirting the surface with occasional breaks. Through these gaps, ocean blues and browns of land could be seen. It looked like the Earth Tyler remembered, but it appeared too lifeless. He thought about the space shuttle missions and tried to visualize the view from above. He didn't necessarily remember it looking alive then, so it was conceivable this was Earth. I could be home. He found it difficult to keep excitement at bay. He watched for a break in the clouds to spot land. There, slightly above what he thought was the equator, a piece of land appeared. He assumed it was as good a place as any to find people, so he transitioned to the brown spot in a blur of light. As he came out of the transition, he found himself hovering above what looked like an African savanna. The plains were 28 Admiral's Ghost dotted with trees, and every now and again he spotted splashes of blue water. From his vantage, he saw what looked like large herds of animals moving slowly across the plain. Perhaps I'm in Africa. If he could validate that thought, he'd know he'd found home. He scanned the horizon in all directions but didn't see signs of civilization. A plume of smoke in the distance brought momentary excitement, but the thrill was quickly replaced with disappointment as he recognized the billowing from the top of a mountain. It was a volcano smoldering before or after an eruption. Damn, nothing but animals. He wanted this to be Earth so bad, but the difficulty in proving he was in Africa brought on a fresh round of depression. Africa was an enormous continent, so finding civilization was perhaps too optimistic. He decided to keep searching until he could find signs of habitation. After reflecting for a moment, he decided West would most likely yield human habitation. Like America, he assumed people congregated along the coastline, where the oceans provided life. With a sigh of regret, he thought back to California, the beaches, and Linda. He'd never moved at this level, but figured the mode of transportation must be similar to the other transitions he'd made to get here. He spotted a hillside on the distant horizon and made his move. In an instant, he was hovering above the gentle slope, noting it ended in steep cliffs, falling off into a deep gorge. The cavernous gorge stretched far to the north and south, looking like it was carved out of the landscape by a massive earthquake. At the bottom, water cut through the valley, fed by myriad waterfalls along the surrounding cliffs. It was a spectacular sight, and Tyler took it in with a newfound sense of wonder. Mist rose from the spray of falling water as millions of gallons poured energy into the river below, cutting the gorge deeper into the earth. Tyler had never seen anything like it. He remembered the Grand Canyon and its immense beauty, but this was something different entirely. The cliffs and hills surrounding the gorge were adorned with dense vegetation, and above the treetops, large flocks of birds winged their way across the landscape. With the sun setting low on the horizon, the effect was glimmering gold meeting deep greens, speckled with sprays of white. Breathtaking came to mind. He'd known Earth held such treasures, but the old Tyler never considered such things important. He hovered above it like an unseen ghost, able to visualize the spectacle, but unable to hear or touch. He broke from his reverie, a needle in the universe 29, and focused on his mission to find clues people existed. Scanning the horizon, he came up empty. He knew he needed to move on, especially with the sun sinking below the horizon. Night would make his search harder, so he picked a distant spot and moved again. As before, only dense forest filled the vista below him. He transitioned again, and one last time, until he found himself at the edge of the continent near an ocean. The water sparkled blue, silver, and orange from the setting sun, and he scanned the coast looking for anything. A boat, a hut, a fire, a city, anything. Nothing. Hope began to slip away until he spotted a large animal ambling along the beach. He focused on the beast, zooming his awareness to the beach below. Holding his concentration steady, the animal came into focus. It looked similar to a giraffe, but not quite the same. It looked like it had a smaller neck than a giraffe, and there were stripes instead of spots. Tyler was nearly certain giraffes had spots. On its head, 2 large antlers spread euphoric state into the air. It made the animal look like a deer whose neck was stretched. The animal had no tail, and the color was russet with stripes of black. Definitely not a giraffe, Tyler decided. Still, he was no expert on African animals, or any animals for that matter. He didn't even know that much about dogs and cats. This could be something from Africa, or even South America, but he couldn't be sure. He watched the animal stop as it became alert. For a brief moment, Tyler thought the animal had somehow detected him, but he brushed that notion aside as the unusual animal sniffed the air, scanning cautiously. It stood frozen for a long time, and Tyler was ready to leave. As sudden as it stopped, it began moving up the beach. Whatever had spooked it did not pose a threat. Tyler laughed at the thought of it detecting him. He was certain that was impossible. The animal moved close to the water when a large flash of yellow sprang from the trees, tackling the animal in an explosion of dirt and water. The predator's size was twice that of the animal it had trapped beneath its claws. Lean muscles rippled across the short, broad body covered in a thick yellow fur. Along its spine, a dark spike of hair ran down the length of the animal's back, tapering near its rear. The animal lay atop its prey, 30 Admiral's ghost mouth around the neck, cutting off the much-needed air of the dying animal. Within moments, the twitching ceased. Tyler was stunned and fascinated by the violent takedown he'd just witnessed. The predator looked similar to a predatory cat, but it had no tail and very large ears. The enormous paws were adorned with scythe-like claws that sunk deep into the lifeless body. It was hard for Tyler to gauge its true size, but judging from the trees nearby, he guessed it to be nearly 20 feet at the shoulders, and at least the same in length. Tyler knew it was not from Earth, at least not the Earth he knew. Maybe this was something from Earth's past or future. Tyler didn't like that thought. He let his focus drift from the animals and hovered once more above the beach as the sun sank below the distant waves. The realization he wasn't on Earth, or at least not the Earth he'd left, brought on a sad melancholy. When the sun finally set, Tyler stared into the darkness at a sea of stars reflecting off the water. Despair threatened to overwhelm him. So many stars, so many planets. He sobbed from the thought of his fruitless efforts. He left the beach to orbit above the blue-white orb. The dark side of the planet moved silently below. Volcanic eruptions spewed orange-red worms across its surface. No lights, no cities, no people. This wasn't Earth. He looked at the space around him and noticed for the first time the planet didn't have a moon. This was a clear sign it wasn't Earth, but he'd never thought to check before going to the surface. He tried to find a bright spot to his search. He'd seen interesting things, and that wasn't without merit. The memory of the misty gorge and the brutal animal attack was something he'd never forget. It had looked so much like Earth. He wondered how many of these false worlds he would have to sift through before finding home. He feared the number was beyond measure. He said goodbye to the primitive world and returned to his search of the galaxy. At least he had more to filter with. A moon. I should have looked for a moon. The thought stung as he realized how little he knew about both the universe or his own world. When you lived there, it was easy to take it for granted. He made a mental shrug before leaping to another system. A needle in the universe. 31 Muller had no concept of time, so he couldn't judge how long he'd been searching. The new part of his awareness recorded every galaxy, star, and planet visited, but the numbers boggled his mind. Out of the millions he'd seen, he'd found hundreds of thousands of planets similar to Earth. But they were not Earth. Most supported life, but much of it was primitive and bestial. Civilizations were hard to come by. Weary from his search, he fended off feelings of hopelessness. That sense of failure filled his mind as he orbited a planet that, from a distance, looked Earth-like. But up close he realized the colors weren't ocean blues, brown land, or white clouds. Instead, gases filled the thick atmosphere, obscuring the planet's true surface. From a distance, everything within the system seemed similar to what he thought Earth was a part of. There were several gas giants, one with rings, and another with colors he was certain were similar to Jupiter. Even the planet below him had a moon like Earth. But once he was up close, the moon was different, and the planet was clearly not Earth. Maddening depression threatened to deflate his motivation and end his quest. The search was surely hopeless, but the promise of seeing Linda and his home had kept him going. For all he knew, hundreds or thousands of years had passed by while he searched aimlessly through the cosmos. He didn't pretend to understand time or how it worked, but searching millions of systems clearly took a great deal of time. It was conceivable Earth no longer existed. The new Tyler could not sense time. Because he moved so fast through the universe, how much real time flew past while he blurred through the empty space between galaxies. He imagined he could devise a way to measure it, but was too despondent to try. Perhaps later, he thought. Perhaps later. He gazed at the lonely planet below. What little motivation remained dissipated. What life could live in that soup of an atmosphere? Certainly not life as he recognized it, but at this point, any intelligence would be welcome. The loneliness of his quest was taking its toll. You'll never find it. Give up the hunt. The voice from the depths, small and persistent, urged calmly. He knew it was the alien presence, but he no longer feared it. He began to believe it might be the only intelligent being he would ever find. No, do not, 32. Admiral's ghost, give in now. The new resolve rose in defense, fighting to prevent the alien takeover. He was torn by these contradicting feelings, and it deepened his sadness. In his current mood, he no longer cared who won. The swirling colors of the multi-hued atmosphere mesmerized him. Without consciously trying, he transitioned into the thick atmosphere. From his new vantage, darkness filled the space below. It was an indication land might exist. The atmosphere was tinged with blue, mottled by streaks of browns and whites. He thought the browns were likely storms, as lightning illuminated the sky. Even with storms, the atmosphere seemed almost calm as the gas barely moved past his awareness. Despite the frustrations, he was fascinated by the world around him. He transitioned to the planet's surface, and from this depth, the sky was a dark blue. nearly black. The thickness of the atmosphere blocked out most of the sun's rays, and oddly enough, the isolating blackness was comforting. He hovered above the ground, letting depression seize him in a dilating melancholy. He daydreamed of a time before his fate had changed, a time on Earth. He remembered good things and bad, wondering what had happened to Linda and her life. He knew Raoul would miss his best salesperson. Tyler could be replaced, but he knew Raoul could never trust anyone like he had trusted him. Perhaps Raoul finally quit the business, his investments and financial prowess providing him with the comfortable cushion he needed to leave it all behind. With relations in the business, it would have been easy for Raoul to walk away. A part of Tyler hoped he did. He'd liked Raoul, even loved him like a brother. Considering Tyler's current predicament, he wanted better for everyone he knew. He hoped Linda went back to her family and made up for the lost time she'd wasted with him. Maybe she married someone who would take care of her the way she deserved. He'd failed completely by dragging her into his world of never-ending parties where you never dried out long enough to experience lows. He'd always admired her for being able to say no, something he couldn't do. Having been without for so long, he felt pangs of withdrawal tempting him with the numbing effects that would ease his pain and suffering. But he knew nothing could do that now. He was a needle. In the universe 33, alone forever, wandering the universe, detached, insubstantial and insignificant. "You are not alone," a voice inside insisted. It was closer than before, winning the battle for control. He didn't care. Perhaps he should let it take over, let it take what was left of him and force him into exile within. No, never. The other, stronger self persisted. He wished he could lock it away, place it into the catacombs of his subconscious. It was more than annoying. It was the part that kept him lonely, forcing him to search for a world he would never see again. "Go away," he shouted, but his plea held no force. Maybe these internal battles were making him crazy, some kind of schizophrenia caused by the change. He'd consumed enough substances to think it might be possible. No, the thought was flat and emotionless, but he wasn't sure which part had said it. The part of his awareness, not focused inside, spotted movement in the distance. He refocused to the distant horizon, over a small rise in the landscape. Tyler watched as a swarm of glowing balls moved on an invisible wind. Thousands crested the hill like a school of fish in a swift current. In fact, the blue tinge of the atmosphere made the illusion of an ocean more real. He watched them move closer. What were they? Were they alive? Surely they couldn't be alive. He had no way to gauge their size, but they were similar to glowing softballs. He moved into the school and inspected each one as it flew past. They emanated a soft pink glow, and inside each globe, small bits of darkness were sprinkled haphazardly. Up close, he decided they were like round jellyfish. He watched as they flew silently past, wondering if they were alive despite being insubstantial bubbles. They looked alive, as if the school were by design rather than a random event. Suddenly, two of the creatures collided, melding into a single, larger bubble. They stayed together for a short while, shifting with patterns and colors. But as quickly as they came together, they separated. When they parted, hundreds of glowing sparkles fell to the ground like pixie dust. What was that? Had they mated? Were they producing eggs? Tyler grew curious. The alien voice confirmed his suspicions, but he ignored the presence as he watched the funny globes. 34 Admiral's ghost, more of them merged, dropping their glowing dust as they separated. He watched a pair split and noticed one of the globes faded before disappearing completely. Did it die? He wasn't sure. He'd heard of animals on Earth that died after mating, their entire purpose for living having been served. He transitioned downstream as the school swarmed over the next rise, moving with the flow of the atmosphere. Just ahead, 2 more split from mating. The glowing dust spread across the ground. One of the creatures came directly at Tyler, its glow fading as it approached. As Tyler watched the fading light, he felt a strong pull into the dull ball. It was the most unusual sensation he'd ever experienced. He was no longer Tyler, but the creature, and felt everything that made up its simple existence. It was odd. The creature was so primitive, Tyler only sensed an overwhelming desire to mate. He needed to merge with another of its kind to produce the next generation. He floated with the school, familiar sensations filling him with that which he'd missed for too long. He felt the gentle breeze pushing them, and he sensed the creature had been born only a very short while before, its drive to mate ending in death whether successful or not. His presence brought the creature back to life, if only briefly. The drive to mate was more powerful than anything Tyler had experienced before, and he sensed the presence of the others around him, urging him to merge. The yearning desire consumed his thoughts while a part of him remained disconnected and observant. Another creature flew near, and Tyler became excited by the anticipation. He felt it touch, and slowly they merged into a single entity. With a powerful rush of light and sensations, he felt the mingling of souls as their bodies became one. The pleasurable feelings grew greater, building in waves he hoped would never crash. The euphoria consumed him like fire, burning with pleasure beyond his wildest dreams. Finally, as pleasure became pain, it crested in an orgasmic release that shook the bodies until they tore apart. With the release, a cool sensation swept through Tyler, and their pixie dust eggs fell to the ground to spawn a new generation in the endless cycle. Tyler never felt so alive, so purposeful, and so complete. So this was true mating. He knew it was more than sex. He was part of a needle in the universe, 35 greater purpose, whole and complete as he realized the species would survive, that a part of him would survive. He was giddy from the experience and felt swept away in its lingering after effects. He flew happily on the breeze, his mission fulfilled. Almost like dozing off, he felt the creature begin to fade, dying after its contribution was given. As the feelings finally dissipated, Tyler felt a pop as he was pulled out of the creature, left to watch it disappear into the gloom. It was gone, but its offspring would mark the memory of its passing. As he was released, his motion stopped as the school continued to drift by. I must do that again, he thought, determined to feel those sensations once more. No substances was so intense, so fulfilling, and he moved back into their midst, hoping to relive the experience. If only I knew how it had happened. He watched helpless as they flew through him, merging and separating without his participation. What had I done? He puzzled over the previous incident as 2 more separated ahead of him. One of the creatures flew past his right, while the other went through him as it began to fade. Once again, he felt the familiar rush as his spirit was pulled into the creature, restoring life into its failing body. Although he didn't have actual sight, he sensed the community around him as they flowed on the steady breeze. Many passed close, producing the exciting sensation caused by his sense of desperation. He was driven to merge, to produce the next generation before all vanished in the wind. The feeling was so intense he pulsed violently from the anxiety coursing through the fragile body. Despite his excitement, Others in the stream kept their distance, choosing to wait for another. Frustration threatened to overcome reason until another creature moved fast toward him. He glowed brighter as he fought for a chance to couple. As it drew near, he felt an electric current pulse through the body, preparing for the event that would follow. As before, the two bodies touched, merging into a single creature, their essence becoming one. Both shared the ancient need to procreate, to reproduce their species and bring the next generation into the world. They pulsed with waves of pleasure, building to the ultimate crescendo he knew waited at the end. The feeling grew intense, ecstasy sweeping through him, carrying him to a place he'd never known. It would end with a final release, but he held on to it while it lasted. This was the ultimate substances he'd needed. This was the escape from his predicament. He lost himself in the experience, floating breathless on a sea of pleasure. Like a wave finally breaking on a beach, the pleasure crested with the orgasmic release that sent the next generation showering to take its rightful place in the universe. The moment satiated him in a euphoric dream state where nothing mattered but the fulfillment of the ultimate purpose. Once again, the creature faded, releasing Tyler from its bonds. He was happy, but wanted more of this ultimate euphoric state. He still wasn't sure how he had entered the creature, but he was determined to keep trying. He positioned himself in the middle of the flow, waiting for the transition. Look for the dying ones. The thought surfaced unbidden from inside. Was it the alien communicating? Tyler wasn't certain, but accepted the advice quietly. He focused on a nearby couple nearing release. He followed as they swept past, pulsing with the light Tyler knew was pleasure. Finally, they split, releasing their eggs into the current. Tyler focused on one of the creatures, looking for its light to fade. But it didn't. It continued its journey, glowing brightly. He quickly scanned for the other creature, but couldn't make it out in the swarm. Wait, there it was. Tyler transitioned in front of it too late, as the light left an empty shell falling to the ground. Damn! The process was too difficult, and Tyler's anger surfaced from the frustration. Apparently these creatures had differences, like male and female. He wasn't sure which was which, but figured the male was likely the one that dropped dead after mating. This always seemed to be the case. He scanned the flow, looking for another pair nearing completion. He spotted a large ball, but knew he wouldn't know which was the male. He decided to scan for the telltale signs. As if helping him through the difficulties, the two creatures drifted only a small distance apart after separation. He watched for any indication a creature was dying, and finally, the one on the right dimmed. Tyler repositioned himself, desperate to make this work. Like being drawn through a long tunnel, he felt the pull that filled the helpless creature with his powerful spirit. As quickly as he took over, he began his hunt, seeking a suitable mate without delay. Once more, he played out the addictive dance, following the music to its conclusion. Tyler didn't know whether the opposite sex felt the same experience, but he was willing to bet they did. A needle in the universe, 37. They were fortunate to experience the same pleasure without the destructive ending. Oh well, to die after such bliss wasn't necessarily a bad way to go. Tyler no longer cared for anything except the hunt for the powerful pleasures he would not deny himself. His quest for Earth fell to the side as self-gratification consumed him with lust. Everything took a back seat to his immediate satisfaction. One after another, Tyler kept up the hunt, possessing creature after creature, merging, releasing, merging, releasing, lost in the euphoric state that took away the pain and made life worth living. Tyler lost count of the creatures he went through, as time stood still among his spiraling euphoria. He had a single purpose: merge and release. He took another creature, filling its dying body, bringing it back from death to breed the offspring that would inherit this desolate world. The wind pushed him through the stream as he sought another mate. He felt the presence of another approaching, and excitement grew. It moved closer before suddenly veering upward and away from Tyler. What? He was certain it had been coming toward him. Tyler felt uneasy as he sensed the stream of creatures flowing past at incredible speeds. He hadn't popped out of the creature, so how had he stopped? Everything flew past in a frustrating rush, leaving him lonely and unafraid. He was no longer moving, his progress stopped by some unknown obstacle. Desperation surfaced as the fear he would never get another chance seized him. The remnants of the creature yearned to mate, but it couldn't move. Without appendages, they were helpless, stuck. Just as intense as mating, the sensation of not mating threatened to overwhelm him. He felt horror as the last of the creatures darted past him on their journey in the wind. The pleasure was replaced with the loneliness of a wasted life. Depression hit hard, dragging him from the earlier highs. He now knew what it was truly like to miss the great opportunity life offered. He remembered his own life and the wasted efforts that didn't bear fruit. Grief consumed him, his misery rushing back as the reality staggered his soul with frustration. Darkness descended over his awareness, plunging him into a chasm of self-pity, self-loathing, and despair. He wanted to die. "Why didn't you destroy me?" he shouted at the universal void. Echoes of those voices taunted him with their sweet prediction of things to come. Why did they want him to live? 38th Admiral's ghost. What was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to become? Why must he be tortured with a life that never ended? Even the death of the creature would not release him from his misery. He would pop out once more, to roam the universe as an insubstantial creature in the ethereal plane. He had no purpose, no life, and no hope. Adrift in the universe, he was banished to wander it aimlessly, seeking a distant world he couldn't recognize that probably no longer existed. Sure, it exists. You'll find it. Even his voice of determination was depleted, unable to withstand the depression consuming him. He drifted inward, letting go of his will. He wondered whether the alien could take away the pain and banish him to non-existence. "Sure I can." The voice drifted into his awareness. It was alien, yet familiar. No, don't let it out. His newfound determination resisted, urging him to take control. Tyler's awareness listened as the two parts fought for control. He didn't care who won. He didn't care what happened. He didn't care about anything. He was forever trapped in his own awareness. They would both live useless lives, failing to complete the cycle, failing to recreate their existence. Linda had wanted it for a long time, but Tyler's selfish addictions kept them from fulfilling that destiny. Now, nothing of Tyler remained on Earth, except the fading memories of those who had known him. Soon, those would fade, and he would be just another soul lost in the blurring vision of history. Perhaps it was fitting, trapped in a creature on some distant world, alone and dying. If only he could die. Die and escape this wandering purgatory where life could only be experienced through others. You could never possess a life of your own. The pleasure of the mating had only been another substance's to escape his pathetic existence. His whole life, short as it was, had been nothing more than one giant escape, an escape from everything that made life worth living. And now he was trapped, unable to undo his past, and destined to repeat it over and over again. He was certain he'd never felt more hatred towards himself than he did at that moment. A life squandered, he thought miserably. squandered because he was unfit to live, unfit to follow the cycle that existed for millennia. Perhaps it was his upbringing, or maybe his genetic makeup, but those too were escapes, excuses for the failures that were surely of his design. How innocent to think some outside influence, a needle in the universe, brought him here, made him give up his life to waste away the years he should have spent building something with Linda. But he could not surrender to that lie. He was to blame. It may have been an alien or some cosmic accident that brought him to this distant world, but he was to blame for the life he'd wasted. He hoped Linda not only grieved him, but felt anger towards him for blowing their one chance at proving their worth. He deserved no less than her wrath. He sensed the creature fading, its life ending after Tyler's failure to procreate. Tyler didn't know how long they really lived, but he did take comfort in knowing the creature had succeeded before his hostile takeover. It was he who had failed. The last of the life drained, and Tyler was released. He felt the insubstantial essence of his being spread out around the dead creature, and he stared at the lifeless husk trapped in a fissure on the side of a small cliff. At least, it found death. Something denied Tyler. He transitioned off-planet, into the dark void of space. The melancholy would never leave as he continued to wallow in his shortcomings. He would be the greatest ghost the universe would know, forever tormenting himself for the life squandered. What better hell for someone who had wasted the precious gifts of life? He stared at the distant sun, entranced by its intensity. He yearned for it to burn him, destroy him in a fiery blaze of molten gas. He transitioned above its surface, awed by the pulsing of the internal fusion powering the giant ball of gas. He transitioned inside the turbulent inferno, surrounded by waves of electric fire, dancing to their own rhythms. But still, he felt nothing. It was a silent movie, visually intense, but without sound, feeling, or emotion. A wave pushed through him, blinding him to the surface in a white-hot light. He transitioned deeper, seeking out a place to hide, a place to curl into a ball and let the depression consume him. Let the alien take over. I do not want to live. I do not want this existence. Anger and resolve drove him deeper into the star as he sank deeper into his subconscious. He willed himself away, trying to undo what had been done. He felt nothing of the boiling mass around him, only the blinding light an indication he still lived. It swept through him and around him as he forced his essence into a tight ball. Or at Admiral's ghost, I want to die. The thought filled his awareness as he tried to force himself from existence. Let the alien have it. I don't care. It was the last thought Tyler had before falling into a deep sleep, fate's teacher. Tyler didn't know what had happened, but he'd been dreaming of he and Linda in Mexico. He remembered they'd had a son, a beautiful son with light brown hair and green eyes. Although he'd known it was a dream, the pleasure of being with her and their son seemed so real. His awareness lingered on the remnants, watching helplessly as they faded into his subconscious. Laying on something soft, he heard hushed sounds close by. A comforting warmth spread through his body. How can I feel? The thought was confusing considering his predicament. He shouldn't be able to feel. He remembered entering the violent inferno of the star, yet everything was dark. The sounds grew louder, a crackling. It sounded like a fire? Did the inside of a sun make this kind of sound? It was so comforting. He couldn't believe he was inside a star. I hear and feel, but see only darkness. Wherever he was, he didn't want to leave. He preferred the warm darkness to the cold depression of space. Did I dream? He remembered Linda with their son. How did I sleep? Since becoming the insubstantial spirit, he'd never needed sleep, so why now? The sound was definitely a fire. The distinctive crackling and occasional pop left little doubt. Tyler wanted to see what made the noise, but darkness hid the flames. Slowly a light grew, blinding at first, then warm and yellow.